The chapel bells had not rung in 3 months. Sister Catherine pressed her trembling fingers against the cold stone wall as distant artillery echoed through the French countryside. The year was 1944, and the small convent of St. Augustine had become a sanctuary for more than prayer. She never imagined that her vows of compassion would lead to harboring an enemy soldier. It began on a rain-soaked evening in September when the sound of breaking glass shattered the silence of evening vespers. Sister Catherine found herself face to face with a wounded German soldier who had collapsed near the chapel entrance. Blood stained his uniform and desperation filled his eyes as he whispered a single word in broken French: "Help!" Every instinct told her to alert the authorities. Every lesson from childhood warned her that the enemy could not be trusted. But something deeper stirred within her heart, something that transcended nationality and uniform. She saw not a German soldier, but a dying human being who had stumbled into her sanctuary. The decision she made in that moment would change everything. This is the true story of how one nun risked her life, her convent, and her faith to protect a man she was supposed to fear. A story buried in the archives of wartime France for nearly 80 years. A story that reveals how mercy can triumph over hatred even in the darkest hours of human conflict. Tonight, I will take you inside the walls of St. Augustine Convent, where Sister Catherine faced impossible choices that would test the very foundations of her beliefs. You will discover how she managed to keep her dangerous secret hidden from Nazi patrols, French resistance fighters, and even her own sisters in faith. You will learn about the underground network that operated beneath the chapel floors, and the coded messages that saved countless lives. But most importantly, you will witness how two people from opposite sides of a brutal war found something unexpected in the shadows of that ancient chapel. Something that neither bullets nor bombs could destroy. The rain that night fell like tears from heaven, washing the blood from cobblestones that had witnessed centuries of pilgrimage and prayer. Sister Catherine had always believed that God worked in mysterious ways, but she never expected his plan to arrive bleeding on her doorstep, speaking the language of her enemies. The soldier could not have been older than 20. Beneath the mud and exhaustion, she glimpsed the face of someone who might have been her younger brother. His breathing came in shallow gasps, and she noticed how his hands shook, not just from cold, but from something deeper. Fear. The same fear she had seen in the eyes of French villagers when the occupation began. Without thinking, she reached for his arm to help him stand. The moment her fingers touched his sleeve, she felt the weight of her decision settle upon her shoulders like a heavy cloak. There would be no turning back from this moment. No explaining this choice to Mother Superior. No justification that would satisfy the authorities if they discovered what she had done. But compassion, she had learned, rarely asks permission before it acts. She guided him through the side entrance of the chapel, her eyes constantly scanning the darkness for signs of patrol. The convent operated under strict curfew, and any movement after sunset would draw unwanted attention. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she supported his weight, praying that her fellow sisters remained deep in sleep. The chapel itself stood empty and cold, moonlight filtering through stained glass windows that depicted scenes of mercy and salvation. How fitting, she thought, that this sanctuary built to honor divine love would now shelter an act of human compassion that defied every law of war. She helped him settle against the stone wall behind the altar, where shadows provided natural concealment. In the dim light, she could better assess his injuries. A bullet wound to his shoulder had bled through his uniform, and exhaustion lined his young face like premature aging. When he looked at her, she saw something that surprised her, gratitude mixed with shame, as if he understood the magnitude of risk she had accepted on his behalf. He attempted to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. The words came in German, which she did not understand, but the tone carried universal meaning. "Thank you. I am sorry. Please do not let them find me." Sister Catherine had studied Latin and French throughout her religious education, but the language of human suffering required no translation. She placed a gentle finger to her lips, signaling for silence, then disappeared into the vestry to gather supplies. Medical training had been part of her preparation for convent life, as the sisters often served as the only health care available to remote villages. She returned with clean cloth, water, and herbs that would help fight infection. Working by candlelight, she began cleaning his wound with practiced efficiency. As she worked, her mind raced through the implications of her choice. The convent housed 12 sisters, including Mother Superior Agnes, who maintained strict adherence to neutrality during the occupation. They had managed to avoid conflict by focusing solely on their religious duties and providing basic aid to any villagers who sought help. But harboring an enemy soldier crossed every line they had carefully maintained. If discovered, the consequences would extend beyond her own life. The entire convent could face closure, or worse. Her sister nuns, who had devoted their lives to peace and service, would suffer for her decision. The thought made her hands tremble as she wrapped the soldier's shoulder. Yet something deeper than logic guided her actions. In her years of religious study, she had memorized countless passages about mercy, forgiveness, and love for all humanity. Tonight, those words transformed from abstract concepts into concrete action. Faith, she realized, meant little if it collapsed the moment it faced real testing. The soldier drifted in and out of consciousness as she tended his wound. In his fevered state, he murmured words she could not understand, but she caught fragments that sounded like names. Perhaps a mother calling to him from across the miles. Perhaps a sweetheart waiting for letters that would never come. Perhaps prayers in his native tongue, seeking the same divine mercy she had chosen to offer. As dawn approached, the practical challenges of her decision became clear. Where could she hide him during daylight hours? How could she provide food without arousing suspicion? What story could she tell if anyone noticed her unusual behavior? The chapel itself offered limited concealment. Morning prayers would bring all the sisters to this very space, and any unusual sound or movement would be noticed immediately. The convent operated on strict schedules that left little room for unexplained absences or mysterious activities. But beneath the chapel lay something that might offer salvation. The crypt. Built centuries earlier to house the remains of founding sisters, it had fallen into disuse as burial practices changed. Few of the current sisters ever ventured into its stone corridors, and Mother Superior had spoken of sealing it permanently to prevent accidents. As the first hints of sunrise touched the stained glass windows, Sister Catherine made her second impossible decision of the night. She would move the soldier to the crypt before morning prayers began. There, among the tombs of women who had dedicated their lives to serving others, she would continue her own act of service. The irony did not escape her. She was about to hide a living man among the honored dead, preserving life in a place designed to commemorate those who had passed beyond earthly concerns. But perhaps those ancient sisters who had faced their own challenges and made their own difficult choices would understand. She helped the soldier to his feet, supporting his weight as they made their way toward the narrow stone steps that led beneath the chapel. Each footfall echoed in the silence, and she paused frequently to listen for any sounds from the convent above. The crypt stretched into darkness, its stone walls carved with symbols of faith and eternity. She guided him to a small alcove near the back where centuries-old dust would muffle any sounds he might make. The air felt cool and still, carrying the weight of history and the presence of those who had gone before. As she helped him settle into his hiding place, the magnitude of what she had begun finally struck her fully. This was no longer simply about tending a wound or offering temporary shelter. She had committed herself to protecting this man's life for however long it might take. Days, weeks, perhaps months of deception and risk stretched ahead. The chapel bells would ring again. This morning, calling the sisters to prayer as they had for generations. But Sister Catherine would kneel with a secret that could destroy everything she held dear, carrying the weight of a choice that challenged every assumption about duty, loyalty and faith. Yet as she looked at the young soldier's face, peaceful now in exhausted sleep, she felt no regret. Only the quiet certainty that some acts of mercy transcend human law and touch something eternal. The real test, she knew, was just beginning. Just beginning. The morning prayers proceeded as they had every day for the past decade. Sister Catherine knelt in her usual position, third row from the altar, her hands folded in practiced devotion. But beneath the familiar rhythm of Latin verses, her heart raced with knowledge that no prayer book could address. Mother Superior Agnes led the service with her characteristic authority, her voice echoing through the chapel that now held secrets within its ancient stones. Sister Catherine found herself studying every shadow, every corner where candlelight failed to reach, wondering if any trace of the previous night's events remained visible. The other sisters moved through their morning routine with peaceful precision. Sister Marie tended the garden that provided herbs for their modest meals. Sister Josephine prepared bread in the kitchen that adjoined the main hall. Sister Elizabeth organized the small library where villagers sometimes came to borrow books or seek guidance. None of them suspected that their sanctuary now harbored a man whose presence could bring death to them all. As the service concluded and the sisters dispersed to their daily duties, Sister Catherine volunteered to remain behind for additional prayer. This raised no suspicion, as she had always shown particular devotion to contemplation. Mother Superior nodded approvingly before departing for her administrative duties. Alone in the chapel, Sister Catherine waited until the sounds of convent life settled into their normal patterns. Only then did she approach the stone steps leading to the crypt, carrying a small basket containing bread, water, and clean bandages hidden beneath a prayer book. The descent into darkness required careful navigation. Each step seemed to announce her presence, though she knew the thick walls would muffle most sounds. The crypt stretched before her like a tunnel into the past, filled with the accumulated silence of centuries. She found the soldier exactly where she had left him, though his position had shifted slightly during sleep. His breathing appeared more regular now, and the fevered flush had faded from his face. When she approached, his eyes opened immediately, alert despite exhaustion. He attempted to sit up as she drew near, but she gestured for him to remain still. From her basket, she produced the bread and water, placing them within his reach. His eyes widened with surprise and gratitude as he realized she had returned. For several minutes, they existed in complete silence. She changed his bandages with gentle efficiency while he ate slowly, savoring each bite as if it might be his last. The simple act of sharing food created an unexpected intimacy between them, bridging the vast gulf of language and nationality that should have kept them apart. When she finished tending his wound, he spoke softly in German. Though she could not understand the words, his tone conveyed deep appreciation, mixed with concern for her safety. He seemed to recognize the enormous risk she had undertaken on his behalf. She responded in French, her voice barely above a whisper. She explained that she would return each morning and evening with food and supplies. She warned him about the schedule of convent activities, particularly the times when sisters might venture near the chapel for private prayer. He nodded frequently during her explanation, though she doubted he understood much of her French. But human communication extends beyond words, and they were developing their own language of necessity and trust. The most pressing challenge now became establishing a routine that would not expose their secret. Sister Catherine realized she needed to modify her daily schedule in subtle ways that would provide opportunities for these clandestine visits without arousing suspicion. She began volunteering for duties that required extended time in the chapel. Cleaning the altar became a more thorough process. Arranging flowers for religious services demanded greater attention to detail. Maintaining the candles required more frequent monitoring. Each excuse bought her precious minutes to slip away to the crypt, but she knew these explanations would not satisfy scrutiny indefinitely. Eventually, someone would notice her unusual dedication to chapel maintenance. The soldier, whom she had begun thinking of as Johann after hearing him murmur the name during sleep, showed remarkable consideration for their circumstances. He remained completely silent during daylight hours, moving only when absolutely necessary. He seemed to understand that the slightest sound could bring disaster upon them both. On the third day of his concealment, their delicate arrangement faced its first serious test. A group of German officers arrived at the convent requesting permission to search the grounds for a deserter who had been spotted in the area. Sister Catherine was arranging altar cloths when Mother Superior approached her with the news. The abbess appeared troubled but resigned to cooperating with the authorities. Resistance would only invite more intensive scrutiny. The search would begin within the hour. Sister Catherine felt her knees weaken as the implications crashed over her. German soldiers would soon be walking through every room of the convent, including the chapel directly above Johann's hiding place. They would examine every possible location where a man might conceal himself. The crypt itself presented particular danger. Military personnel would certainly investigate any underground areas as they represented obvious hiding spots. Even if Johann remained completely silent, a systematic search would reveal him within minutes. She excused herself from chapel duties and hurried to warn him, her mind racing through impossible scenarios. Could they move him to another location? The convent grounds offered few alternatives, and daylight movement would be visible from multiple windows. Could they somehow disguise his presence? The crypt contained several ancient sarcophagi and stone monuments. Perhaps he could position himself to blend with existing structures, though this seemed desperately unlikely to succeed. When she reached the crypt, Johann immediately sensed her distress. She explained the situation in urgent whispers, using gestures and simple words to convey the immediacy of their danger. His face grew grave as he grasped the magnitude of their predicament. But instead of panic, he displayed a calmness that surprised her. He pointed to himself, then to the stone walls, and made a gesture she interpreted as hiding. Not just hiding, but concealing himself so completely that even a thorough search might miss him. Johann had noticed something during his days in the crypt that had escaped her attention. Behind one of the larger monuments stood a narrow gap between the wall and the stone carving. The space appeared barely wide enough for a human body, and shadows made it nearly invisible unless viewed from a specific angle. Working together, they carefully moved him into this cramped hiding place. The fit was incredibly tight, requiring him to remain motionless for however long the search might last. Any movement or sound would immediately expose his presence. Sister Catherine arranged loose stones and debris to further obscure the gap, creating the appearance of natural accumulation over centuries of neglect. She scattered dust across the disturbed areas and ensured that no obvious signs of recent activity remained visible. As she prepared to return upstairs, Johann reached out and gently touched her hand. In that brief contact, she felt his gratitude and his understanding of what she had risked for him. The moment lasted only seconds, but it strengthened her resolve for whatever ordeal lay ahead. The search began 30 minutes later. Sister Catherine joined her fellow sisters in the main hall as German officers systematically examined each room of the convent. The soldiers moved with professional efficiency, checking closets, examining storage areas, and investigating any space large enough to hide a human being. Mother Superior accompanied the search team, answering questions about the convent's layout and daily operations. Her cooperation appeared genuine, though Sister Catherine detected subtle signs of tension in the abbess's demeanor. When the soldiers reached the chapel, Sister Catherine's heart hammered so violently she feared it might be audible. The officers spent considerable time examining the altar area and the side chambers where religious artifacts were stored. Then their leader noticed the stone steps leading to the crypt. The officer's boots echoed against stone as he descended into the darkness below. Sister Catherine remained in the chapel above, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles turned white beneath her pale skin. Each footstep seemed to thunder through her bones, announcing the approach of discovery and death. She could hear muffled conversations in German drifting up from the crypt. Flashlight beams swept across ancient walls, illuminating centuries of dust and decay. The soldiers moved methodically through the underground chambers, their voices growing closer to Johann's hiding place with each passing moment. Minutes stretched into eternity. Sister Catherine found herself reciting silent prayers, not for divine intervention, but for the strength to face whatever consequences awaited. If they discovered Johann, she would not deny her role in hiding him. Some choices demanded complete ownership regardless of their cost. The voices below grew fainter as the search continued deeper into the crypt's network of passages. She heard stones being moved, heavy objects shifted, thorough investigation of every possible concealment. These were experienced soldiers who understood how desperate men might attempt to hide. Then silence. The absence of sound felt more terrifying than the previous noise. Had they found him? Was Johann even now being dragged from his hiding place, preparing to face execution as a deserter? Would they return for her next, demanding explanations she could never provide? Footsteps approached the stone stairway again. Sister Catherine forced herself to breathe normally as the search team emerged from below. The lead officer's expression revealed nothing as he brushed dust from his uniform. He spoke briefly with Mother Superior, reporting their findings in clipped German phrases. Sister Catherine caught only fragments, but the tone suggested routine completion of an unproductive task. No discovery, no evidence, no reason for further investigation. The search team departed 20 minutes later, their vehicles disappearing down the country road that connected the convent to the outside world. Mother Superior gathered the sisters to discuss the morning's events, expressing relief that their peaceful sanctuary had been restored. Sister Catherine participated in these conversations with appropriate responses, but her mind remained focused entirely on the crypt below. Had Johann survived the ordeal? Was he injured or unconscious? Hours would pass before she could safely venture below to discover his fate. The afternoon dragged with unbearable slowness. Each routine task felt meaningless compared to the life or death drama playing out beneath the chapel floor. Sister Catherine found herself making mistakes during evening meal preparation, her concentration shattered by anxiety and fear. Only after the final evening prayers concluded and her fellow sisters retired to their quarters could she risk the journey below. She waited an additional hour to ensure complete silence throughout the convent, then gathered supplies and descended into darkness once again. The crypt felt different now, charged with the residual tension of the morning's search. She made her way carefully to Johann's hiding place, whispering his name softly as she approached. No response came from the narrow gap behind the monument. Terror gripped her heart as she imagined finding his lifeless body, suffocated in the cramped space or killed by soldiers she had not heard. She called again, slightly louder, risking detection for the sake of knowing his fate. A faint rustling sound answered her call. Johann emerged slowly from his concealment, moving like an old man despite his youth. Hours of remaining motionless in an impossibly tight space had left him stiff and disoriented, but alive. Relief flooded through her as she helped him stretch cramped muscles and drink water from her hidden flask. They had survived their first major test, but both understood how narrowly they had escaped disaster. The soldiers had come within feet of discovering him, their flashlights probably illuminating the very stones that concealed his presence. Johann's gratitude expressed itself through actions rather than words he knew she could not understand. He carefully rearranged his hiding place to better accommodate future emergencies, improving the concealment while making the space slightly more bearable for extended periods. Over the following days, their routine evolved to address lessons learned from the search. Sister Catherine developed more sophisticated methods for monitoring convent activities and identifying potential threats. Johann created backup hiding spots throughout the crypt, ensuring he could quickly disappear regardless of which direction danger approached. Their communication improved as well. Simple gestures and repeated phrases began forming a basic vocabulary that transcended language barriers. Johann learned essential French words like danger, quiet, and food. Sister Catherine picked up German terms for thank you, safe, and tomorrow. These small connections created an intimacy that surprised them both, Despite representing opposite sides of a brutal conflict, they were developing genuine care for each other's welfare. The nun who had vowed to serve all humanity discovered that this service could extend even to those her country considered enemies. The soldier who had been trained to view French civilians as obstacles to military objectives found himself protected by the very people he had been taught to distrust. Their relationship challenged every assumption about loyalty, patriotism, and the nature of human connection during wartime. But beyond these philosophical implications lay practical concerns that grew more pressing each day. Johann's presence in the crypt could not remain secret indefinitely. Other sisters occasionally ventured below for storage or cleaning purposes, and eventually someone would notice signs of habitation. More importantly, Johann's wound was healing well enough that he might soon attempt to leave the convent and continue whatever journey had brought him there originally. Sister Catherine found herself hoping this moment would be delayed, though she could not fully explain her reluctance to see him go. Their evening meetings became the highlight of her days, breaking the monotony of convent routine with purpose and excitement she had never experienced during her years of religious service. She looked forward to tending his injuries, sharing simple meals, and developing their unique form of communication. Johann seemed equally engaged by their encounters. Despite his precarious situation, he showed genuine interest in learning about her life and the daily operations of the convent. He asked questions through gestures and expressions, seeking to understand the world that had unexpectedly sheltered him. One evening, as she cleaned and rebandaged his shoulder, Johann produced something from his uniform pocket. A small photograph, creased and worn from handling. The image showed a young woman with blonde hair and a gentle smile standing beside a house with flower boxes beneath the windows. He pointed to the woman, then to himself, conveying that this person held special importance in his life. Sister Catherine understood immediately. This was his sweetheart, perhaps his wife, waiting for his return from a war that had already lasted too long. The photograph created a moment of profound connection between them. Sister Catherine saw not an enemy soldier, but a young man separated from someone he loved, carrying her image as a reminder of what he hoped to return to when the fighting ended. She responded by describing her own calling to religious life, using simple words and gestures to explain how she had chosen service to God over marriage and family. Johann listened intently, seeming to understand that they had both made sacrifices for beliefs larger than themselves. These personal revelations deepened their bond while simultaneously highlighting the impossible nature of their situation. Johann belonged to a world of warfare and national loyalty that had no place for French nuns. Sister Catherine inhabited a realm of spiritual devotion that excluded romantic attachments or political allegiances. Yet here they were, sharing bread and conversation in a crypt beneath enemy lines, finding common humanity in circumstances that should have made friendship impossible. Their relationship existed outside normal categories, sustained by mercy and mutual respect, rather than shared background or common goals. As Johann's physical condition continued improving, Sister Catherine began planning for the inevitable moment when he would be strong enough to leave. The thought filled her with unexpected sadness, as if losing a dear friend rather than simply completing a humanitarian obligation. She started gathering supplies he would need for travel, extra food that could be carried safely, clean clothes to replace his blood-stained uniform, maps of the local area that might help him avoid major roads and military checkpoints. But each preparation reminded her that their time together was drawing to a close. Soon the crypt would return to its ancient silence, holding only memories of their extraordinary encounter. Johann would disappear into the chaos of war, leaving behind no trace of his presence except in her heart. The convent bells continued ringing each morning, calling the sisters to prayer as they had for generations. But Sister Catherine now understood that some prayers are answered in ways that challenge everything we think we know about faith, mercy, and the mysterious workings of divine love. The 10th day brought unexpected visitors that would test their carefully constructed sanctuary in ways neither had anticipated. Sister Catherine was in the kitchen preparing Johann's evening meal when Sister Marie burst through the door, her face flushed with excitement and concern. French resistance fighters had arrived seeking shelter for the night. 3 men, wounded and exhausted from a failed sabotage mission, needed medical attention and safe passage to the next safe house. Mother Superior had already agreed to provide aid, as the convent's reputation for neutrality extended to helping anyone in desperate need. Sister Catherine felt the blood drain from her face as she grasped the implications. Resistance fighters would naturally investigate every possible hiding place within the convent, searching for German patrols or collaborators who might betray their presence. The crypt would be among their first priorities for securing the building. She excused herself from kitchen duties and hurried toward the chapel, her mind spinning through impossible scenarios. How could she warn Johann without exposing him to discovery? How could she explain the presence of resistance fighters to someone who wore the uniform of their enemies? The chapel stood empty in the afternoon light, shadows dancing across stone walls that held secrets no architecture could contain. Sister Catherine descended quickly into the crypt, her footsteps echoing with unusual urgency. Johann recognized her distress immediately. She explained the situation through their developing vocabulary of gestures and simple words, conveying that French fighters had arrived and would soon search the underground chambers. His face grew pale as he understood they faced a new kind of danger. These men would not simply overlook suspicious signs or conduct routine searches. They possessed intimate knowledge of hiding places and concealment techniques. More crucially, they would show no mercy to German soldiers, regardless of circumstances. Johann's response surprised her with its immediate acceptance of their predicament. He gathered his few possessions and prepared to move deeper into the crypt's network of passages, seeking areas that might escape even thorough investigation. But as they explored the furthest reaches of the underground chambers, they discovered their options were severely limited. The resistance fighters would certainly examine every tunnel and alcove, leaving no stone unturned in their quest for security. Sister Catherine found herself facing an impossible choice. She could reveal Johann's presence to the resistance fighters, hoping their shared opposition to Nazi occupation might inspire mercy. Or she could attempt to mislead fellow French citizens, betraying her own countrymen to protect an enemy soldier. The weight of this decision pressed upon her shoulders like physical burden. Every principle she had embraced since taking religious vows seemed to conflict with every other principle. Loyalty to France opposed mercy toward all humanity. Truth conflicted with protection of the innocent. Johann seemed to sense her internal struggle. He placed a gentle hand on her arm and spoke softly in German, his tone conveying acceptance of whatever fate awaited. He would not ask her to betray her own people for his sake, but Sister Catherine had already made her choice 10 days earlier when she first offered aid to a bleeding stranger. She would not abandon him now to face execution at the hands of men who fought for the same freedom she cherished. Working with desperate efficiency, they moved Johann to the deepest section of the crypt, where ancient burial chambers connected to forgotten passages that predated the current convent structure. These tunnels had been carved centuries earlier by monks who needed storage areas for wine and grain. The space required Johann to crawl through narrow openings and remain in uncomfortable positions for extended periods. But it offered concealment that might survive even the most thorough search, provided he could endure hours of complete silence and stillness. Sister Catherine arranged the entrance to appear naturally blocked by centuries of accumulated debris. She scattered dust and cobwebs across disturbed areas, creating the impression that no human had passed this way in decades. As she prepared to return upstairs, Johann caught her hand briefly. In that moment of contact, she felt his understanding of the choice she had made. He knew she was risking everything to protect him from her own countrymen, and the weight of that sacrifice was not lost on either of them. The resistance fighters arrived as evening prayers concluded. Sister Catherine joined her fellow sisters in the main hall as Mother Superior welcomed the three men with quiet dignity. They appeared exhausted and wounded, their clothes torn from days of hiding in forests and abandoned buildings. Their leader introduced himself simply as Marcel, offering no additional details about their mission or destination. He requested permission to search the convent for security purposes, explaining that German patrols had been tracking them for days. Mother Superior agreed without hesitation, though Sister Catherine noticed subtle tension in the abbess's posture. These men brought violence and danger into a sanctuary dedicated to peace, forcing unwelcome compromises upon women who had chosen lives of contemplation. The search began immediately, conducted with professional thoroughness that exceeded even the German investigation. Marcel and his companions examined every room systematically, checking for signs of enemy presence or surveillance equipment. When they reached the chapel, Marcel paused to study the altar and surrounding areas with particular attention. He questioned Sister Catherine about the building's history, asking detailed questions about architectural features and structural modifications. She answered honestly about everything except the crypt's current occupant, describing the underground chambers as storage areas rarely visited by the sisters. Marcel nodded thoughtfully, then announced his intention to examine the lower levels personally. Sister Catherine's heart raced as she watched him descend the stone steps, carrying a flashlight that would illuminate every corner of Johann's former hiding places. She forced herself to remain calm, participating in conversation with the other sisters while her mind focused entirely on the drama unfolding below. Marcel's search of the crypt lasted nearly an hour. She could hear him moving methodically through the chambers, investigating every possible concealment with the expertise of someone who had both hidden from enemies and hunted them in return. The sounds grew fainter as he explored deeper sections of the underground network. Sister Catherine found herself counting minutes, calculating how long Johann could remain motionless in his cramped hiding place without making involuntary sounds. When Marcel finally returned to the chapel, his expression revealed nothing about his discoveries. He reported to his companions that the building appeared secure, with no signs of German surveillance or hidden threats. But something in his manner suggested incomplete satisfaction with his findings. He continued asking questions about the convent's daily routines, the frequency of German visits, and the loyalty of local villagers. Over the following hours, as the resistance fighters rested and received medical attention from the sisters, Marcel maintained subtle vigilance that kept Sister Catherine constantly on edge. He seemed to sense something unusual about the atmosphere, though he could not identify the source of his unease. The three men remained at the convent for 2 days, using the sanctuary to recover from their wounds and plan their next movements. During this time, Sister Catherine could not risk visiting Johann, leaving him alone in his hiding place without food or water for extended periods. She found ways to slip small amounts of bread and water into her prayer book, carrying these supplies to the chapel during her regular devotional periods. But delivering them to Johann required opportunities that rarely presented themselves while the resistance fighters maintained their watchful presence. On the second evening, Marcel approached her directly with questions that made her blood run cold. He had noticed her frequent visits to the chapel, her unusual nervousness during conversations, and small inconsistencies in her explanations of convent routines. Sister Catherine realized she was facing interrogation by someone trained to detect deception and extract information from unwilling subjects. Marcel's tone remained respectful, but his questions grew increasingly specific and difficult to deflect. He asked about her background, her reasons for joining religious life, and her feelings about the German occupation. Each question seemed designed to test her loyalty and identify potential security risks. She answered truthfully whenever possible, drawing upon genuine experiences and emotions to maintain credibility. But the conversation felt like walking across thin ice, where any misstep might reveal the dangerous secret she protected. Marcel's most challenging question came without warning. He asked directly whether she had noticed any unusual activities around the convent, any signs that someone might be hiding in areas she regularly visited. The moment stretched between them like a vast chasm. Sister Catherine understood that her answer would determine not only Johann's fate, but potentially her own survival. Marcel was clearly capable of extreme measures if he suspected betrayal. She met his gaze directly and spoke with quiet conviction. The convent remained as peaceful as it had always been, dedicated solely to prayer and service to any souls who sought sanctuary. She had noticed nothing that would concern French patriots fighting for their country's freedom. Marcel studied her face for long seconds, searching for signs of deception or hidden knowledge. Sister Catherine forced herself to remain calm, drawing upon years of religious training that had taught her to find strength in moments of spiritual testing. Finally, Marcel nodded and moved on to other topics. But Sister Catherine sensed he remained unconvinced, filing away his suspicions for future consideration. The resistance fighters departed on the third morning, disappearing into the French countryside as quietly as they had arrived. Their leader thanked Mother Superior for the convent's hospitality while maintaining careful distance from commitments that might compromise future operations. As their footsteps faded down the country road, Sister Catherine felt relief wash over her like cool water after fever. But she also understood that Marcel's suspicions might eventually lead to more intensive investigation. She waited several hours before venturing into the crypt, ensuring that no observers remained to witness her movements. The underground chambers felt different now, charged with memories of recent danger and narrow escape. Johann emerged from his hiding place like a man returning from the dead. Days of confinement in cramped, airless spaces had left him weak and disoriented, but alive. His gratitude expressed itself through actions rather than words as he helped restore the crypt to its normal appearance. Sister Catherine realized their sanctuary had been permanently changed by recent events. Too many people now knew of the convent's willingness to provide shelter, creating risks that would only increase as the war continued. More importantly, Johann's presence could no longer be maintained indefinitely. His wound had healed sufficiently for travel, and each passing day increased the likelihood of discovery by friend or enemy alike. They both understood that their time together was drawing to a close, though neither spoke directly of the approaching separation. Instead, they focused on practical preparations for his departure, gathering supplies and information that might aid his journey. Johann had begun sharing details of his intended destination, using their improvised communication system to describe a route that would take him toward Switzerland and eventual safety. Sister Catherine committed these plans to memory, knowing she might need to help him navigate the first stages of escape. But beneath these practical discussions lay emotional currents that surprised them both. Their relationship had evolved beyond simple humanitarian aid into something resembling genuine friendship, built upon mutual respect and shared experience of extraordinary circumstances. The young German soldier had revealed himself to be thoughtful, grateful, and deeply aware of the sacrifices made on his behalf. The French nun had discovered reserves of courage and determination she never knew she possessed. Their conversations, conducted through gestures and simple phrases, touched upon topics that transcended nationality and uniform. They spoke of families left behind, dreams interrupted by war, and hopes for peaceful futures that seemed impossibly distant. Johann shared memories of his childhood home, describing landscapes and traditions that painted pictures of a Germany Sister Catherine had never imagined. Not the militaristic nation of propaganda posters, but a place of farms and festivals, ordinary people living ordinary lives before politics and hatred consumed everything. Sister Catherine spoke of her calling to religious service, explaining the joy she had found in dedicating her life to helping others. But she also acknowledged the loneliness that sometimes accompanied such dedication, the human connection sacrificed for spiritual purposes. These personal revelations created intimacy that neither had expected when their relationship began as emergency medical care. They had become friends across an impossible divide, finding common humanity in circumstances that should have made friendship unthinkable. Yet this growing connection made Johann's inevitable departure more difficult for both of them. Sister Catherine found herself dreading the moment when the crypt would return to its ancient silence, empty of the presence that had given her days new meaning and purpose. Johann seemed equally reluctant to leave the safety and companionship he had found beneath the chapel. Despite his desire to return home, he had discovered something valuable in their unlikely friendship, something that made the prospect of resuming his solitary journey through enemy territory less appealing. But war does not accommodate personal preferences or emotional attachments. Their situation remained as dangerous as ever, and Johann's continued presence threatened not only his own life but the safety of every sister in the convent. The decision to leave would have to be made soon, before winter weather made travel impossible or increased German security measures eliminated remaining escape routes. Sister Catherine began making final preparations for Johann's departure, though each task felt like another step toward losing something precious and irreplaceable. Their extraordinary encounter was approaching its inevitable conclusion, leaving behind only memories of mercy triumphant over hatred in the darkest hours of human conflict. The chapel bells would continue ringing each morning, calling the sisters to prayer as they had for generations. But Sister Catherine would forever hear in those bronze voices the echo of choice that had changed her understanding of faith, service, and the mysterious ways divine love manifests in a broken world. The preparations took on a ritual quality that neither acknowledged directly. Each evening, Sister Catherine descended into the crypt carrying items that would aid Johann's journey. A worn map of the regional countryside, carefully copied from the convent's atlas. Civilian clothes procured from donations left by grateful villagers. A small pouch of coins saved from her personal allowance over many months. Johann received each offering with solemn gratitude, understanding that these preparations marked the countdown to their separation. He had begun exercising in the confined space, rebuilding strength that would be essential for the dangerous journey ahead. His shoulder moved with increasing ease, the wound now little more than a tender scar beneath clean bandages. Their conversations during these final days carried weight that simple words could not express. Johann attempted to teach her basic German phrases, gesturing patiently as she struggled with unfamiliar sounds. Sister Catherine shared stories of local geography, describing safe paths through forests and reliable sources of assistance in distant villages. But beneath these practical exchanges flowed deeper currents of connection that surprised them both. Johann spoke of his mother's garden, where roses climbed wooden trellises and bees hummed among lavender bushes. His eyes grew distant as he described Sunday afternoons spent reading beneath apple trees before uniforms and ideologies transformed peaceful young men into instruments of destruction. Sister Catherine found herself sharing memories she had never voiced to anyone. The doubts that had plagued her during early years of religious life. The nights spent wondering if she had chosen dedication to God or simply escape from a world that demanded choices she felt unprepared to make. These intimate revelations created bonds that transcended the circumstances of their meeting. They had become confidants as well as allies, sharing vulnerabilities that made their approaching separation feel like losing essential parts of themselves. Johann's gratitude extended beyond words into actions that revealed his character more clearly than any conversation could achieve. He spent hours cleaning areas of the crypt that had accumulated centuries of dust and debris. He repaired loose stones in the walls, ensuring that future visitors would find the chambers more secure and comfortable. These improvements served practical purposes, but they also represented his desire to leave something positive behind. The crypt would bear traces of his presence long after his departure, silent testimony to the extraordinary encounter that had unfolded beneath ancient stones. Sister Catherine watched these activities with emotions she struggled to understand. Johann's dedication to improving their shared sanctuary touched something deep within her heart. Here was a man who responded to kindness with gratitude, to shelter with service, to mercy with genuine appreciation. The contrast between this thoughtful individual and the propaganda images of brutal German soldiers that filled resistance leaflets could not have been starker. Johann had revealed himself to be fundamentally decent, shaped by the same hopes and fears that motivated people on both sides of the conflict. This realization forced Sister Catherine to confront uncomfortable truths about the nature of war and the humanity of those labeled as enemies. Johann had not chosen his uniform any more than French conscripts had chosen theirs. Circumstances and politics had transformed ordinary people into adversaries, but beneath the surface remained shared human experiences that connected rather than divided. The weather began changing as October arrived, bringing shorter days and cooler temperatures that would soon make outdoor travel treacherous. Johann's window of opportunity for safe passage was closing rapidly, creating urgency that neither could ignore indefinitely. Mother Superior announced during morning prayers that German patrols had increased their activities throughout the region, searching for resistance fighters and deserters with renewed intensity. Several local villages had been subjected to house-to-house searches that left residents terrified and suspicious of any unusual activities. This news confirmed what Sister Catherine already suspected. Johann's continued presence at the convent was becoming impossible to sustain. Each passing day increased the likelihood of discovery, with consequences that would extend far beyond their personal safety. That evening, as she descended into the crypt for what might be their final meeting, Sister Catherine carried herself with the dignity of someone approaching a sacred ceremony. Johann seemed to sense the significance of the moment, rising to greet her with unusual formality. They sat together in the flickering candlelight, sharing bread and water in silence that held more meaning than any conversation. Both understood that tomorrow night Johann would begin his journey towards Switzerland, leaving behind the sanctuary that had sheltered him for nearly 3 weeks. Sister Catherine had prepared a final gift for his departure, a small wooden cross carved by her own hands during sleepless nights when worry for his safety had driven away rest. The piece was simple, but elegant, bearing no inscription that might identify its origin, if discovered by hostile authorities. Johann accepted the cross with reverence that moved her deeply. He held it carefully in his hands, examining the grain of the wood and the precise details of her craftsmanship. Then he pressed it to his lips in a gesture of gratitude that required no translation. From his own possessions, Johann produced the photograph he had shown her weeks earlier. The young woman with blonde hair and gentle smile standing beside the house with flower boxes beneath the windows. He pointed to Sister Catherine, then to the photograph, conveying that she now held equal importance in his heart. This comparison overwhelmed Sister Catherine with emotions she had never experienced during her years of religious service. Johann was placing her alongside the person he loved most in the world, acknowledging that her mercy had created bonds as strong as romantic attachment. They spoke through the night, using their developing vocabulary to share thoughts and feelings that formal language could not adequately express. Johann described his plans for the journey ahead, the route he would follow, the contacts he hoped to reach along the way. Sister Catherine offered final advice about local conditions, warning him about villages where German sympathizers might report suspicious travelers. She described safe houses operated by people whose loyalty to human decency transcended political allegiances. But their most important communication occurred without words, in gestures and expressions, in shared silence and mutual understanding. They acknowledged that their relationship had become something extraordinary. Two people from opposite sides of a brutal war had found friendship, respect, and genuine affection despite every obstacle that should have kept them apart. As dawn approached, bringing the day that would end their time together, neither spoke of the sadness that filled their hearts. Instead, they focused on practical details and expressions of gratitude that seemed inadequate for the magnitude of what they had shared. Johann would depart the following evening, using darkness to conceal his movement away from the convent. Sister Catherine would provide final supplies and guidance for the first stage of his journey. After that, he would face the dangerous path to freedom alone, carrying memories of mercy that had saved his life and transformed his understanding of human nature. The morning prayers proceeded with familiar rhythm, but Sister Catherine found herself unable to concentrate on Latin verses that had once brought comfort and focus to her daily routine. Her thoughts remained fixed on the young man hidden beneath the chapel floor, preparing for a journey that might end in capture, imprisonment, or death. Throughout the day, she performed her regular duties with mechanical precision while her heart raced with anticipation and dread. Every sound seemed amplified, every shadow potentially concealing threats to their carefully maintained secret. As twilight settled over the French countryside, Sister Catherine made her final descent into the crypt, carrying supplies that would sustain Johann through the first dangerous miles of his journey to freedom. The candle flame danced against ancient stones that had witnessed their impossible friendship, casting shadows that seemed to memorialize every whispered conversation, every shared meal, every moment when mercy triumphed over the hatred that consumed the world above. Johann emerged from the darkness one last time, transformed from the bleeding, desperate soldier who had collapsed at their chapel doors 3 weeks earlier. He moved with quiet confidence now, his wound fully healed, his spirit restored by kindness he had never expected to receive from those his country had taught him to consider enemies. They stood together in the sacred silence of the crypt, two souls who had found something eternal in the midst of temporal destruction. No words existed to capture what they had discovered in this underground sanctuary where the living had hidden among the honored dead, where compassion had flourished in soil watered by centuries of devotion. Sister Catherine handed him the final provisions, her fingers lingering on his as she transferred the small bundle that represented hope for his survival. In that brief contact, they shared everything that could not be spoken. Gratitude, affection, the knowledge that their paths would never cross again, yet their connection would endure beyond the reach of armies and ideologies. Johann pressed the wooden cross she had carved for him against his heart, then reached into his uniform, pocket one final time. He withdrew a small metal button from his coat, polished to gleaming brightness during the long hours of hiding. Without ceremony, he placed it in her palm, closing her fingers around this simple token that would forever remind her of the choice she had made when faced with a dying stranger. The chapel bells began their evening call to prayer as Johann prepared to leave the crypt that had sheltered him through the darkest period of his young life. Sister Catherine would climb these stone steps alone, returning to a routine that would seem hollow without the purpose that had given her days such profound meaning. But as Johann disappeared into the French night, carrying her mercy with him toward an uncertain future, Sister Catherine understood that some acts of compassion echo through eternity. In choosing to see humanity rather than uniform, love rather than nationality, she had participated in something sacred that would outlast every battle, every border, every bitter division that set human beings against one another. The war would end eventually. The occupation would become history. But in the archives of heaven, where every act of mercy is recorded and treasured, the story of a French nun and a German soldier would remain forever fresh, testament to the truth that love is stronger than hatred, that kindness can bloom in the darkest soil, and that sometimes the most profound victories are won not on battlefields, but in the quiet corners of human hearts where compassion conquers fear. Years later, when peace returned to the French countryside and the convent bells rang out over fields no longer scarred by conflict, Sister Catherine would still descend into the crypt during her evening prayers. There, among the tombs of those who had served before her, she would remember the young man whose life she had saved, and who, in turn, had saved something essential within her own soul. The secret of the chapel would remain buried in stone and memory, but its truth would live on in every choice to show mercy rather than judgment, kindness rather than cruelty, love rather than hate. For in the end, Sister Catherine had learned faith is not measured by the prayers we recite, but by the grace we extend to those who need it most desperately. especially when they arrive at our door wearing the face of our enemies.